Hi there, greetings, and thank you for joining me. Dr. Node Smith here, and today I'm going to talk about the question of vulnerability. And the reason why I'm going to talk about this today is that a few weeks ago, I overheard a conversation about vulnerability and the idea, just to get a definition down, the idea of vulnerability that was being discussed was that of Brene Brown. And she's written a lot of books on shame and judgment and vulnerability. And this is the definition that she runs with. The definition of vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. But vulnerability is not weakness, it's our most accurate measure of courage. When the barrier is our belief about vulnerability, the question becomes, are we willing to show up and be seen when we can't control the outcome? When the barrier to vulnerability is about safety, the question becomes, are we willing to create courageous spaces so that we can be fully seen? And this specific definition is from her book, Braving the Wilderness. And she develops various definitions of, they're all pretty close to this. This is a pretty concise definition of what she's talking about. So that's the context of the conversation on vulnerability that I overheard the other week. And I was struck by the resistance to Dr. Brown's ideas on vulnerability. The conversation was part of a larger context on developing what I'm going to call a new masculinity, the embodying of truth, honesty, and authenticity within men, promoting men to master themselves and become leaders through rigorous personal development and growth. This is I wouldn't say it's a trend, it's a growing movement within elite athletes, business individuals, pretty much men who are at all conscious are aware of this happening. And I was unaware that there's a contingency of this new masculinity movement that seems to be threatened by certain ideas around vulnerability. The new masculine movement is something that I support 100%. It promotes responsibility, integrity, and personal development. These are all things that, to me, require a large amount of vulnerability. And I would have thought, actually, that Dr. Brown's ideas would find fertile ground amongst anyone interested in introspection, personal growth, and development. And so I will say that perhaps this is, for the most part, true, because there's always going to be individuals that are triggered by elements of a presenter's personality, and won't be necessarily able to decipher the ideas of that presenter from their personality. And this may have indeed been the case amongst the individuals who are having this conversation, but I still thought that it was worthwhile to write about this and to bring up these issues, because if one person's struggling with being triggered by something that I believe is so universal, I can assume that other people are as well. So anyhow, this video and the blog post that accompanies it is meant as a commentary on this resistance to vulnerability. And I would perhaps more specifically word this as the idea that vulnerability in any way contradicts masculinity. I do not think that vulnerability contradicts masculinity, and as we go forth here, quite the opposite is true. I advocate Dr. Brown's ideas on vulnerability. I think that they're universal, and I think that they are intended to first and foremost be a way of relating to ourselves and not as a method to relating to others. I don't believe that she advocates a general state of vulnerability by which we leave ourselves open to attack from a culture that seeks to destroy individuals who are too vulnerable, as well as a culture that weaponizes such psychological understandings. And I sense that this is the primary concern within the new masculine movement, namely that men are being asked to be vulnerable so that they can be torn apart, criticized, and blamed openly, basically for the woes of historical pedagogy. And I think this is a legitimate concern. And also, I would add, kind of as a aside, it's a concern that takes a lot of vulnerability to voice in our current culture. So it's something that we both need to voice, and also we need to be able to hear, as a culture. So anyway, my reading of Brene Brown is that she's mostly concerned with personal growth and the cultivation of the self. And this is the vulnerability that she's talking about. Fundamentally, at least, I admit absolutely that the manifestation of vulnerability certainly has to do with relationships with other people. But first and foremost, it has to be an internal vulnerability. So I'd like to describe my own understanding of what vulnerability is within the context of a new masculine paradigm, where men are striving to take accountability for their actions, lead with integrity, and grow in emotional maturity, all while not giving up their warrior spirit. And I think this element is the most crucial to understand when it comes to what's being advocated in terms of vulnerability here. So vulnerability is key. We only learn by being vulnerable. And this vulnerability, as I've stated, is first and foremost a willingness and a commitment to open up internally and learn about ourselves. The warrior's most intense and important battles are always waged within himself. And it takes vulnerability to even enter in to this arena. And this is an internal vulnerability. Whenever we open ourselves to learn something new, there is a vulnerability. There's this acknowledgement that I don't know this, I'm new to this. And it can be scary. This can be learning a new skill, or it could be learning something new about ourselves. And we all know someone who has absolutely no interest in this type of vulnerability on any level. We describe these individuals as with phrases like they're just who they are, and they're just like that. And these are both euphemisms for stagnant. These people have no interest in learning. Their growth has stopped. They've decided that it's preferable not to question their thoughts, opinions, and ideas, that their current worldview is just good enough for them. And we can look at this decision, to not grow, and quickly realize that it's the safest option. By taking this position, I am able to fortify the defenses of who I believe that I am. I can put all my emotional effort into defense rather than building and expanding who I am or what I identify with or as. And with that, that takes a lot of emotional and mental resources. And so if I take this stance of defense, of just staying who I am or who I think I am, I don't need to worry about any new information coming in and potentially changing my understanding of myself or the world that I see around me. The vulnerability we experience whenever we open ourselves to exploring something new is absolutely necessary. And it's more tangible when we're learning and exploring who we are and what we think, what we don't know, what our potential is, what we truly want. This type of personal growth is a lot more scary and vulnerable than learning a new skill, such as woodworking. But even in that, there's that anxiety of, I don't know this, I'm new to this, and I could fail at this. So I need to open myself up to get instruction, to ask questions, all things that I think as men we understand are difficult and hard and scary, and we can actually use that fear to push new opportunities and growing in new skills away. We do the same thing with our internal growth as well. When we begin exploring questions of our identity, things get pretty nebulous. It's not like learning a skill. Since we don't know fully how exactly our learning is going to change us when we begin exploring who we are, and these deeper existential questions, it can be incredibly unsettling. We inherently have to travel through this unknown space to reach a more refined clarity of who we are. And the novice, those of us who are beginners with that process of introspection, are more likely to experience fear, confusion, and potentially react by retreating back into the comfort of our previous patterns, our thoughts, our ideas, even our behaviors. And this fear of introspection, this fear of exploring new and deeper parts of ourselves, this is the true source of courage. And we heard this, like Brene Brown talks about this courage. This is where the true warrior finds himself, and finds the ability to rise to the occasion and fight the real demons in his life. Because these demons are internal demons that we all struggle with and grapple with. And this is the most fundamental aspect of vulnerability. It has nothing to do with others. There's an extension of this vulnerability as we choose to interact with others and we test out elements that we've learned from our own internal exploration. But this comes afterwards. And I think that a lot of people have this idea that being vulnerable or vulnerability automatically means shedding all of our armor so that we're absolutely defenseless when we interact with other people. There's this idea that vulnerability equals zero activity, zero leadership, and zero backbone. And this is a gross misunderstanding of the value of vulnerability. First, it's worth repeating that the true value of vulnerability is an internal process. And the version of vulnerability that we sense when we interact with others is actually our decision to share our authenticity or our insights into the truth that we've discovered within ourselves through that introspective vulnerability, through that internal processing. And this type of vulnerability, that decision to manifest our authenticity in relationship, is largely secondary. Our interactions with other people provide us the training ground to try out our new understandings of ourselves. And absolutely, these instances are more dangerous than our internal journey. We may be hurt by others. They may not understand us. We may be too raw and react or be triggered. These are all potential and even likely outcomes when we're scared that we'll be judged, right? And we will be judged, just like we judge other people who are trying to do the same things that we're trying to do. We're not perfect at this. We need to practice this in order to gain mastery. This is what vulnerability is all about. This is what becoming a master in anything is all about. The dangers increase in direct correlation to the rewards we can expect from participating in these parts of our lives and in these parts of ourself. But there's no way to learn to grow and become a more whole human, to become a better, more potentiated man without this type of vulnerability. Both the internal vulnerability of exploring ourself, as well as the external practice, entering into that arena with other people and sharing what we've learned. And just one more thing to consider about this, to kind of wrap up this commentary on the resistance of vulnerability, is vulnerability is going to look different in different contexts. And this is where I'd like to kind of connect this to, I think I have been connecting it to the idea of the warrior spirit and what we as men are trying to reclaim within ourselves. But like I just said, vulnerability is going to look different in different contexts. And the true warrior knows his adversary. He knows even when his adversary is himself. And just because vulnerability is a key component to learning and growth, and in authentic relating, it doesn't mean that every situation is going to call for the same level of vulnerability, right? I think that many men get this idea in their heads that what's being advocated is an emotional vulnerability 100% of the time, okay? And 100% vulnerability 100% of the time. And this is absolutely not true. What's being advocated is learning and growth by humans, both men and women, individually and in relationship with each other. And as this learning and growth this learning and growth will always occur at the pace of the individuals who choose to participate in it. This is something that we've all been called to participate with, and we will all choose to participate or accept that invitation to participate in various ways, in various degrees. We'll grow in this participation, and that's to be expected, and even at its core is being advocated by vulnerability. So that's Dr. Note-Smith's thoughts on vulnerability for today. I hope you're having an awesome and amazing day, and continue to love yourself and continue to share that love with other people as you interact with them from day to day. All right.